One photograph destroyed a kingdom, ended 2 lives, and exposed a conspiracy that governments still hide today. Think of this, a single image so dangerous that seeing it meant instant death for a monarch. Not because it showed state secrets or military plans, but because it captured something far more explosive in 19th century Europe. It revealed that the most powerful king in Germany was living a double life that would make modern scandals look like playground gossip. This isn't just another royal mystery. This is the story of how one moment of carelessness created a chain reaction that toppled a throne, murdered a king, and left behind clues so damaging that 138 years later, classified files remain locked away in government vaults. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and the lengths people will go to protect their darkest secrets. Most people know King Ludwig II of Bavaria as the eccentric monarch who built the fairy tale castle that inspired Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle. Millions visit Neuschwanstein every year, snapping selfies in front of those famous towers. But what those tour guides never tell you is that every stone in that castle was placed to hide something. Every secret passage, every hidden door, every impossible architectural feature served one purpose: to conceal the most dangerous secret in royal Europe. Because Ludwig II wasn't just building castles. He was building an entire shadow world where the rules of 19th century society didn't apply, where a king could love who he wanted, live how he chose, and be himself without destroying everything he was born to protect. The year was 1863, and 18-year-old Prince Ludwig was about to discover something that would define the rest of his short, tragic life. Prince Paul von Thurn-Uendi taxis arrived at the Bavarian court as a military aide, all polished buttons and perfect military bearing. But when their eyes met across the throne room, something shifted in Ludwig's world forever. This wasn't just attraction. In the rigid social structure of 1860s Bavaria, what passed between these two young men was revolutionary. Letters discovered centuries later in forgotten archives reveal the intensity of their connection. Paul wrote to Ludwig with passion that would be familiar to any modern reader. "My heart exists only for you. When I see your window lit at night, I know you're thinking of me." But love letters between men in 1863 Bavaria weren't just inappropriate. They were evidence of something that could destroy careers, families, and in Ludwig's case, an entire dynasty. The Bavarian court had sophisticated networks of spies, informants, and gossips who made today's paparazzi look amateur. Within months, whispers were spreading through Munich's social circles about the crown prince's unusual friendship with his aide. Queen Marie, Ludwig's mother, moved swiftly. She summoned Paul to a private meeting that lasted less than an hour. By morning, he was gone, transferred to a posting in Prussia with orders never to return to Bavaria. Ludwig's first lesson in love had ended in devastating loss, but it taught him something crucial. If he wanted to survive as king while being true to himself, he would have to become a master of deception. When Ludwig's father died suddenly in 1864, making the 18-year-old king of one of Germany's most powerful states, he faced an impossible choice. He could live as society expected, marry a princess, produce heirs, and slowly die inside. Or he could find another way. Ludwig chose a third option that was so audacious it took decades for anyone to fully understand what he was doing. He began, slowly and carefully, to reverse his entire existence. Court meetings that once happened at 10 a.m. gradually moved to 2 p.m., then 6 p.m., then midnight. By 1870, the King of Bavaria was conducting royal business exclusively between sunset and sunrise. His ministers thought he was developing eccentric habits. They had no idea he was engineering the most elaborate secret life in royal history. While proper Bavarian society slept, Ludwig was creating an alternative universe where different rules applied. The key to understanding Ludwig's transformation lies in recognizing what was happening during those nighttime hours. This wasn't just about avoiding responsibilities or indulging in parties. Ludwig was carefully constructing a parallel kingdom populated by people who, like him, couldn't exist authentically in the daylight world of 19th century social expectations. Musicians performed private concerts in underground grottos. Actors staged elaborate performances for audiences of one. Artists created works that celebrated beauty and passion without the moral constraints that governed public life. For the first time since Paul's departure, Ludwig wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. But Ludwig needed more than just darkness to protect his secret world. He needed spaces designed specifically for activities that couldn't happen in traditional royal palaces. This is where his castle-building obsession becomes crucial to understanding the larger story. Neuschwanstein wasn't built as a fairy tale fantasy. Every architectural decision served a practical purpose in Ludwig's elaborate deception. Secret passages allowed people to move through the castle without being seen by other visitors. Hidden doors enabled quick escapes if unexpected guests arrived. The throne room, famously never completed, was designed without a throne because Ludwig never intended to hold public court there. The most revealing space was the Venus Grotto at Linderhof Palace. Officially described as Ludwig's tribute to Wagner's opera Tannhauser, the grotto was actually something far more sophisticated. An artificial cave with a heated underground lake, mechanical wave machines, and revolutionary electric lighting that could change colors or be extinguished instantly. This wasn't just elaborate decoration. It was cutting-edge technology deployed to create completely controlled environments where Ludwig could orchestrate scenarios impossible anywhere else. Under red lighting, the grotto became a setting for passion. Blue lighting created melancholy, romantic moods. And when those lights went out completely, the space became invisible to anyone who might be watching. The engineering required to build these spaces was extraordinary. Hidden ventilation systems, concealed drainage, mechanical systems that could create artificial weather inside underground chambers. Ludwig was essentially building the 19th century equivalent of movie sets, complete environments where reality could be suspended and different rules could apply. In 1881, Ludwig met someone who would prove to be both his greatest joy and his ultimate destruction. Josef Kainz was a 23-year-old Hungarian actor performing in Munich's theater district. He wasn't particularly famous, wasn't from nobility, wasn't anything special by court standards. But something about him captivated Ludwig completely. Their first meeting lasted until dawn. Within days, Ludwig had invited Kainz on a journey to Switzerland, traveling under false names as Count Starnberg and his secretary. This was unprecedented. Kings didn't travel incognito with actors. They didn't vacation alone with commoners. They certainly didn't behave in public as equals. But Ludwig, intoxicated by finally finding someone who seemed to understand his complex inner world, made a decision that would prove fatal. In Lucerne, Switzerland, he allowed a local photographer to take their portrait. The photograph that emerged from that Swiss studio looks innocent enough to modern eyes. Two men in formal Victorian clothing, one sitting, one standing, both looking relaxed and comfortable. But to anyone familiar with 19th century royal protocol, this image was revolutionary in the most dangerous way possible. Kings didn't stand while commoners sat. This wasn't just unusual. It was impossible according to the rigid social hierarchies that governed European royalty. The only way this photograph could exist was if the relationship between these two men transcended normal social boundaries. And the expressions on their faces told an even more dangerous story. Kainz sits casually, confidently, looking directly at the camera with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his position. Ludwig stands beside him, but his gaze isn't directed at the photographer. He's looking at Kainz with an expression of complete, helpless adoration that no amount of royal training could disguise. When copies of this photograph reached Munich, Ludwig's political enemies realized they finally had the evidence they needed. But they also understood that homosexuality alone wouldn't be sufficient to remove a king. Bavarian nobility had always quietly tolerated such relationships as long as they remained discreet. They needed something more legally compelling. They needed to prove Ludwig was insane. Dr. Bernhard von Gudden was Bavaria's most prominent psychiatrist, a man whose medical opinions carried enormous weight in legal proceedings. He was also ambitious, politically connected, and willing to provide the exact diagnosis Ludwig's enemies needed. The fact that he had never met the king, never examined him, never even been in the same room with him was apparently irrelevant. In March 1886, Gudden produced a comprehensive medical report declaring Ludwig mentally incompetent to rule. The document is a masterpiece of medical manipulation, transforming every aspect of Ludwig's unusual lifestyle into symptoms of psychiatric disease. His reversed sleep schedule became evidence of dementia. His private theatrical performances indicated delusions of grandeur. His relationships with men were classified as contrary sexual instincts, indicating moral insanity. Modern psychiatrists reading Gudden's report are struck by its complete lack of actual medical evidence. Every conclusion is based on second-hand reports, rumors, and speculation. By contemporary medical standards, the document would be considered malpractice so egregious it would end a career. But in 1886, it provided exactly the legal foundation needed to remove an inconvenient king. The conspiracy moved with shocking speed. On June 10, 1886, Ludwig was officially declared insane and unfit to rule. His uncle was named regent. A commission led by Dr. Gudden was dispatched to Neuschwanstein to arrest the king. Ludwig received warning just hours before the commission arrived. His loyal servants, people who had kept his secrets for decades, offered him one last chance to escape. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, perhaps the only member of European royalty who truly understood Ludwig's situation, had arranged carriages at the border. Freedom was literally hours away, but Ludwig hesitated. In that moment of decision, he seemed to grasp the impossibility of his situation. What kind of life awaited a deposed king? Where could he go where his identity wouldn't follow him? How could Ludwig exist if he was no longer king of Bavaria? When the commission arrived at 4 a.m. on June 12th, they found Ludwig in his bedroom, fully dressed, as if he had been waiting for them. The confrontation between Ludwig and Dr. Gudden was brief but revealing. "How can you declare me insane when you have never examined me?" Ludwig asked. Gudden's response demonstrated the arrogance that would prove fatal. It was unnecessary. The documentary evidence is overwhelming. They transported Ludwig to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg, officially for psychiatric treatment, but everyone understood the reality. This wasn't a hospital. It was a prison designed to hold one person until a more permanent solution could be arranged. On the evening of June 13, 1886, less than 48 hours after his capture, Ludwig made a request that should have raised immediate suspicions. He asked Dr. Gudden to join him for a walk by the lake. Despite everything Ludwig had been through, despite the circumstances of his captivity, Gudden agreed. He even dismissed the guards who normally accompanied such outings. What happened next has never been adequately explained, despite official investigations, multiple inquiries, and decades of speculation. Both men left the castle at 6:30 p.m. By 8 p.m., when they failed to return, search parties were organized. The bodies were discovered floating in waist-deep water about 25 meters from shore. The official verdict came within hours: murder-suicide. Ludwig had killed Dr. Gudden and then drowned himself. Case closed, investigation terminated, documents sealed. But nothing about the physical evidence supported this conclusion. Ludwig was a strong swimmer, confirmed by multiple witnesses throughout his life. The water where he was found was shallow enough that he could have easily stood up. No water was found in his lungs during the autopsy. Most mysteriously, Ludwig's watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., while Gudden's showed 8:10 p.m., suggesting they died more than an hour apart. Dr. Gudden's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle. His face bore scratch marks and nail marks. His neck showed clear signs of strangulation. These weren't the injuries of a drowning victim, but of someone who had fought desperately for his life. The aftermath of Ludwig's death reveals the true extent of the conspiracy against him. The fisherman who discovered the bodies, Jacob Little, received mysterious payments that continued for the rest of his life. Within a year, this simple fisherman had become mayor of his town and owned substantial property. Years after Little's death, his private papers revealed something extraordinary. He had written that Ludwig was attempting to escape when he heard a gunshot. According to Little's account, Ludwig fell forward into the water, and Little was told by unknown individuals that if he valued his family's safety, he had seen nothing but 2 drowned men. Meanwhile, Ludwig's personal effects began disappearing. His coat, which multiple witnesses claimed showed bullet holes in the back, vanished immediately after the autopsy and has never been found. His private papers were seized and mostly burned. Servants who had attended his nighttime gatherings were dismissed with generous pensions and strict confidentiality agreements that bound them for life. The Venus Grotto was sealed for renovations that lasted years, effectively erasing any physical evidence of what had occurred there. Richard Hornig, Ludwig's longest and most intimate companion, disappeared from court immediately and lived the remaining 30 years of his life in complete obscurity, never speaking publicly about his relationship with the king. The story of Ludwig too resonates powerfully with contemporary audiences because the fundamental conflicts he faced haven't disappeared. We live in an era where public figures still struggle with authentic self-expression versus social expectations, where leaked photos and private communications can destroy careers overnight, where the intersection of personal life and public responsibility creates impossible pressures. Consider how modern leaders navigate social media, where every image is analyzed for hidden meanings, where body language experts dissect public appearances for signs of private relationships. Ludwig's fatal photograph would today be trending worldwide within hours, analyzed frame by millions of viewers looking for clues about the true nature of the relationship it captured. The medical conspiracy against Ludwig also feels remarkably contemporary. The weaponization of psychiatric diagnoses to remove inconvenient leaders, the use of expert testimony to validate predetermined political conclusions, the manipulation of medical authority to serve powerful interests. These tactics didn't disappear with the 19th century. Perhaps most relevantly, Ludwig's story illuminates the ongoing tension between authentic identity and institutional power. How many modern leaders live double lives, carefully managing public personas while hiding fundamental aspects of who they are? How many people in positions of authority sacrifice personal happiness for professional survival? One of the most striking aspects of Ludwig's legacy is the economic vindication of his vision. The castles that bankrupted Bavaria and were used as evidence of his insanity now generate over 50 million euros annually for the region. Neuschwanstein alone attracts 6 million visitors yearly, making it one of Europe's most profitable tourist destinations. The Mad King's Folly became Bavaria's greatest economic asset. Every Instagram photo taken at those castle gates, every Disney movie inspired by those towers, every tourist ticket purchased represents a form of posthumous victory for Ludwig's artistic vision. The man destroyed for being impractical created some of the most enduringly valuable cultural properties in the world. This economic success raises profound questions about how we evaluate leadership and decision-making. Ludwig's contemporaries saw only debt and extravagance. Modern Bavaria sees sustainable revenue streams and cultural capital that will generate income for centuries. Were Ludwig's priorities actually more far-sighted than his critics realized? Ludwig's story also reveals how technological innovation can serve personal liberation. The electric lighting systems he installed in the Venus Grotto represented cutting-edge engineering, making Bavaria home to Germany's first private power station. But this technology wasn't deployed for industrial progress or military advantage. It was used to create spaces where authentic human connection could flourish away from social surveillance. The mechanical wave machines, hidden ventilation systems, and concealed drainage that Ludwig incorporated into his secret spaces demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how environment shapes experience. He was essentially an early pioneer of immersive design, creating controlled atmospheres that could facilitate emotional and physical intimacy impossible in conventional settings. This technological approach to privacy feels remarkably modern. Ludwig was using 19th-century engineering to solve problems that contemporary people address through encryption, private social media accounts, and secure communication platforms. The fundamental human need to carve out authentic spaces away from public scrutiny remains constant across centuries. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Ludwig's story is how completely he understood the price of authenticity. His diary entries, discovered after his death, reveal a man torn between desperate longing for genuine connection and clear-eyed awareness of the consequences of pursuing it. "I am damned," he wrote in 1869. But damnation with him is sweeter than salvation alone. This wasn't the writing of someone who didn't understand his situation. Ludwig knew exactly what he was risking and made a conscious choice that personal truth was worth more than political survival. This decision feels both admirable and tragic to modern audiences. We celebrate authenticity and self-acceptance, but we also recognize the practical realities that constrain individual choice. How many people today face similar, if less dramatic, decisions between personal truth and professional advancement? How many choose safety over authenticity, and how many pay the price Ludwig paid for choosing the opposite? The removal of Ludwig II demonstrates how effectively coordinated attacks can destroy even the most powerful individuals. The conspiracy against him succeeded because it combined multiple attack vectors: financial pressure, medical authority, political maneuvering, and moral judgment. His enemies didn't just criticize his spending. They systematically documented every expense to create a narrative of fiscal irresponsibility. They didn't just question his judgment. They recruited medical authority to pathologize his behavior. They didn't just oppose his policies. They made his very existence as king seem impossible. This multi-front approach overwhelmed Ludwig's ability to defend himself. By the time he recognized the full scope of the threat, the conspiracy had already achieved irreversible momentum. The photograph from Switzerland was just the final piece of evidence in a case that had been building for years. Despite official investigations and decades of historical research, fundamental questions about Ludwig's death remain unresolved. Why was a deposed, supposedly insane king worth murdering? Who had the resources and motivation to organize such an elaborate assassination? Why do government files related to his death remain classified nearly 140 years later? The most compelling theory suggests that Ludwig's knowledge posed ongoing threats to other members of the nobility. 2 decades of midnight gatherings and secret relationships had given him information about the private lives of countless powerful individuals. Even in captivity, even declared insane, he remained a potential source of devastating revelations. The speed and thoroughness of the cover-up supports this interpretation. Within weeks of Ludwig's death, every trace of his shadow kingdom had been systematically erased. Papers burned, servants silenced, spaces sealed, witnesses relocated or eliminated. This wasn't just about protecting Ludwig's reputation posthumously. This was about protecting living people whose secrets had died with him. Ludwig's story offers complex lessons for contemporary leaders navigating the intersection of personal identity and public responsibility. His absolute refusal to compromise his authentic self was both his greatest strength and ultimate weakness. He created extraordinary beauty and lasting cultural value, but he also made himself politically vulnerable to people willing to exploit his honesty. A more pragmatic leader might have married Princess Sophie, maintained discreet relationships privately, and focused on gradual social reform rather than personal liberation. This approach might have preserved his throne and allowed him to advocate for others facing similar struggles from a position of continued power. But such calculations miss something essential about Ludwig's character and historical moment. In 1880s Bavaria, there was no safe way to be openly homosexual regardless of social position. Ludwig's choice wasn't between authenticity and strategy. It was between authenticity and non-existence. His decision to prioritize personal truth over political survival was revolutionary precisely because it seemed impossible. By living openly according to his nature, even in secret, he demonstrated that alternative ways of being were possible. His shadow kingdom proved that different social arrangements could work, even if they couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Ludwig's story resonates particularly strongly in our current digital age, where private communications can become public instantly, where images taken in supposedly secure settings can destroy careers overnight, where the boundary between public and private life has largely collapsed. The photograph that triggered Ludwig's downfall would today be shared globally within minutes. The private letters that served as evidence against him would be leaked, analyzed, and endlessly discussed across social media platforms. The financial records used to support claims of instability would be scrutinized by armies of amateur investigators. But our digital age also offers tools for privacy and authentic connection that Ludwig could never have imagined. Encrypted communications, anonymous platforms, global communities of people sharing similar experiences. The isolation that defined Ludwig's experience was partly a function of technological limitations that no longer constrain us. This technological perspective makes Ludwig's achievements even more remarkable. Using only 19th-century tools, he created sophisticated systems for privacy, authentic relationship, and alternative community. What might he have accomplished with modern technology? How might his story have ended differently if he had access to contemporary tools for secure communication and community building? Today, millions of people visit Ludwig's castles without understanding what they're really seeing. Those fairy tale towers and elaborate grottos weren't built by a mad king indulging fantasies. They were constructed by a man desperately trying to create space for authentic human experience in a world that criminalized his fundamental nature. Every secret passage represents a strategy for survival. Every hidden chamber tells a story about the lengths people will go to protect what matters most to them. Every architectural impossibility demonstrates what can be achieved when someone refuses to accept the limits others try to impose. The fact that these spaces now generate enormous revenue for Bavaria adds another layer of irony to Ludwig's legacy. The government that destroyed him for fiscal irresponsibility now depends economically on the very wasteful projects they used to justify his removal. The buildings that were evidence of his insanity have become proof of his genius. Looking back across nearly 140 years, it's worth considering how Ludwig's story might have ended differently. What if he had been more politically sophisticated about managing his public image? What if he had cultivated stronger alliances before his enemies organized against him? What if he had been less trusting about allowing that fatal photograph? More fundamentally, what if 19th-century European society had been capable of accepting a king who didn't conform to traditional expectations? What if the rigid social hierarchies that defined royal behavior had been flexible enough to accommodate individual difference? What if love had been considered more important than dynastic succession? These questions feel less hypothetical today, when we've seen leaders successfully navigate public careers while living openly according to their authentic identities. Ludwig's tragedy was partly a function of historical timing. He was born into a world that couldn't accept who he was, but he died just decades before social attitudes began shifting in ways that might have made his survival possible. The photograph that cost Ludwig his life reveals something profound about power, authenticity, and the courage required to live according to your deepest truth. In that single image, we see a king who chose love over convention, personal connection over political calculation, authentic relationship over strategic advantage. That choice destroyed him, but it also created something lasting. Not just the physical castles that still inspire millions of visitors, but the example of someone who refused to accept that power and authenticity were incompatible. Ludwig proved that it was possible to create alternative worlds where different rules applied, even if sustaining those worlds ultimately cost everything. His shadow kingdom existed for barely 2 decades, but its influence extends far beyond his lifetime. Every person who has ever struggled to balance public expectations with private truth, every leader who has wrestled with the tension between authentic self-expression and institutional responsibility, every individual who has tried to create space for experiences that dominant culture doesn't permit can find something meaningful in Ludwig's example. The water of Lake Starnberg has kept its secrets for 138 years. Government files remain classified, protecting people who have been dead for over a century. But the photograph that started everything is still visible, still revealing the truth its enemies tried so desperately to suppress. In that image, we see not a mad king and his actor, but 2 human beings who found in each other something worth risking everything to protect. Their story ended in tragedy, but their courage to love authentically in a world designed to prevent it remains as revolutionary today as it was in 1881. Ludwig built his castles in darkness, but they have become monuments to light. He lived his truth in shadow, but created beauty that shines across centuries. He died protecting a love that his world couldn't accept, but that love built something stronger than kingdoms. The enduring proof that authentic human connection is worth any price, even when that price is everything. The forbidden photograph still exists, still telling its dangerous story to anyone willing to see what it really reveals. Not scandal, not insanity, not the fall of a king, but the triumph of 2 people who chose to be fully human in a world that demanded they be something less. Their love destroyed a throne, but it built something more valuable. The eternal reminder that some truths are worth dying for, and some photographs are worth preserving, no matter how dangerous they might be. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most tragic and misunderstood stories. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel. I am dedicated to uncovering the hidden, untold stories in history. Ring that notification bell, because the next untold story will move you more than this. Until then, question the narratives, listen to the silenced voices, and never stop seeking the truth behind the legends.